We're going to go over the new hose and nozzle fleet replacement and a few items you'll need to know to better understand before it goes into service. A few critical items we need to go over first is understanding that the new hose does not mix with the old hose. The old hose is high pressure and the new hose is low pressure. All hose on your rig, including what's on the rack at the station, will need to be turned in. All old nozzles will be turned in. The current Acron nozzles are designed for high pressure, not low pressure. The only nozzle not being turned in is going to be the Acron 125 GPM that we use for the F500. All PSI presets on your pump panel will be lowered. For a little bit of background, through Tech Committee, KCFD current attack packages were tested along with the new hose and nozzle manufacturers. It had been over 30 years since KCFD has tested all hose and nozzles. We've had a history of kink issues with the current setup. 5 pumpers tested various hose and nozzle manufacturers. Surveys were compiled from those 5 pumpers. The results from those surveys were deciding factors on what was purchased. Chief Schallmeyer, with the assistance of Tech Committee, secured a grant for funding for fleet replacement. We're hopeful that the new hose and nozzle switch will start sometime in December. When we talk about a tack package, this is the pump, the hose, and the nozzle. We look at all 3 components. If any part of the attack package is changed, it will have an effect on how the hose and the nozzle performs. This is where we currently have continuity issues. Each rig has different lengths of pre-connects, nozzles, and different pump designs over the past 30 years. This has an effect on the overall attack package. One more component we look at is nozzle reaction. This is the amount of weight in pounds pushing against you when the nozzle is open. One way to bring this down is low pressure hand lines and nozzles. Current 1 3/4 Acron nozzles have 70 to 120 pounds of nozzle reaction. It all depends on if you're under pumping it or pumping how it's designed. The new Elkhart 1 3/4 nozzles have 60 pounds of nozzle reaction when they're pumped as designed. So first we're going to go over our current attack package, then we'll go over the new. Starting with our current attack package, we're going to start at the pump. Pump design has changed over the years. Each outlet and inlet plumbing can have an effect on the overall pressure and flow. Current 1 3/4 Big 10 is economical high pressure hose. We haven't been using it how it was designed. When it's under pump, it creates kinking issues. Nozzle whip, this is when you get a kink about 1 to 2 feet from the end of the nozzle. And nozzle reaction issues if you are pumping it correctly. Now let's look at the current Acron nozzle we use. If we pump 200 feet of Big 10 with the Acron 200 GPM at 100 PSI nozzle like it was designed to be used, we would need to pump discharge pressure of 195 PSI to get 100 PSI at the tip. Now we'll talk about the new attack package. The 1 3/4 Key Combat Sniper is low pressure hose that will have less fatigue on the user while maintaining adequate GPM and stream reach. The hose has more of a supported structure, which helps with the kinks and reduces nozzle whip. We also will be getting 2-inch Key Combat Ready. This is low pressure hose with 2.5-inch couplings. This will be on the pre-connect on the rear of the pumper. We also will be converting our high-rise hose over to this 2-inch. This hose is easier to handle with less fatigue than a 2.5 while getting more water than just 1 3/4 on the fire. With the 2-inch Key Combat Ready, we do not want to use a gated Y. We also don't want to use this hose for fire department connections on the outside of the building. When it comes to the high-rise hose, we will need a higher discharge pressure than what the current setup is. Each pumper will also be receiving new 2.5-inch Key Big 10. It's what we currently use and will continue to use for fire department connections, the RAM monitor, foam operations, and the gated Y. All companies also will be getting 4-inch Big Yellow. There's not much difference between this and what we currently use other than the max discharge pressure is higher. Each nozzle will come with an interchangeable nozzle tip. Instead of removing the nozzle to change from the fog to smooth bore, you can simply just remove the tip from the shutoff. It's the same design for 1 3/4 and the 2.5-inch nozzles. Here's an example of how easily and quickly it could be changed out. For the 1 3/4 nozzles, we'll have Elkhart Chief XD 1.5" shutoffs. It'll come with a fog nozzle tip that flows 160 gallons per minute at 50 psi. It's constant gallonage. And a 7/8 tip for the smooth bore, which is 160 gallons per minute at 50 psi. This will give us about 60 pounds of nozzle reaction. You'll also be able to spin off the tips to be able to add on 1 3/4 if you need to add more line and use the nozzle as a shutoff. If you do this, make sure you secure the nozzle in the open position with a piece of webbing. For the 2" and the 2.5" nozzles, we have an Elkhart Chief XD 2.5" shutoff. The fog nozzle tip will be able to flow 250 gallons per minute at 50 psi constant gallonage, or use an 1 1/16 smoothbore tip. This roughly gives you around 89 pounds of nozzle reaction. You'll be able to spin off the tip and put 1 3/4 line coming off the end of it because the threads are 1.5". They are not 2.5" threads. We will be keeping the current Akron 125 gallon per minute foam nozzles. This should remain in the compartment and should only be used during foam operations. You can pump the new 1 3/4 sniper hose at high pressure for the foam nozzle. Here you will see we have a side-by-side comparison of what we're currently using and what the new package will look like. On the left here we have 200 feet of key Big 10 1 3/4 with the Akron nozzles we're using, which is a 200 GPM at 100 PSI fog nozzle. In this example, we use the PSI mode preset at 150. And this gives you about 64 PSI at the nozzle. Gives you about 142 gallons per minute with a nozzle reaction of about 70 pounds. On the new side over here on the right, you'll have 200 feet of Key Combat Sniper 1 3/4 with the Elkhart 160 GPM fog nozzle at 50 PSI. We put the PSI mode on this one at 100 PSI since it's low pressure. This gives you right at 50 PSI at the nozzle like it's designed, giving you 168 gallons per minute with a nozzle reaction of 60 pounds. Each company will be receiving a hidden booster nozzle. This flows the same as our current booster nozzle at 45 gallons per minute at 100 PSI. You pump it the exact same. The only difference with this, it has two selections on it where it has a straight stream and a blade stream. All pumpers will be receiving a RAM monitor, also known as a street pipe. This is a mobile master stream. It's to be used with a 2.5" Key Big 10 hose and is capable of being set up unmanned. Here are the max discharge pressures. For the 1 3/4 Combat Sniper, it's 450 PSI. For the 2" Combat Ready, it's 450 PSI. For the 2.5" Big 10, it's 360 PSI. And for the 4" Big Yellow, it's 225 PSI. Each hose will be marked 10% higher than these numbers. I gave you these numbers as a safety factor. That way we're not over pumping them. Here are the friction loss numbers. For the 1 3 Combat Sniper, if we're trying to flow 160 gallons per minute, it's going to be about 14.6 PSI friction loss per 50-foot section. For the 2" Combat Ready, if we're trying to flow 250 gallons per minute, it'll be right around 12.9 PSI friction loss per 50-foot section. For the 2.5 Big 10 and the 4" Big Yellow, those numbers are relatively the same with what we currently do. Here are the discharge pressure and flow numbers from our KCFD Pierce pumpers. This chart's going to be available at the hands-on training, so you guys can be able to refer back to it. For a quick review, remember that PSI mode is for pre-connects. The preset will be changed to a lower pressure for the new hose. RPM mode is for relay pumping, feeding a truck, and supplying the fire department connections. Remember, we're using the 2.5" hose, not the 2" hose on those. Key recommends cleaning the hose with mild soap, brush, and water. You can dry the hose like we currently do, or the hose can be reloaded, drained, but still wet per key as long as it's clean. Understand that freezing conditions might be problematic with this. The big takeaways here are understanding that it's not a smoothbore versus fog nozzle argument. It's understanding that it's a low pressure versus high pressure. Our pumpers will work less, our hand lines will be easier to advance while charged, while using less energy to keep the hand line open longer. Remember, all hose can kink. The new hose resists kinks better. The next portion of training will be hands-on, where we'll have side-by-side cutouts of the hose to compare, You'll be able to see how it folds when it loads up. You'll be able to deploy and flow each size hose and nozzle. The new booster nozzle, set up the RAM monitor, and go over how much hose each company will be receiving.